The morning I left, it was raining. Not the dramatic kind of rain that movies use to tell you something important is happening. Just a quiet, gray, indifferent rain. The kind that doesn't care about you. The kind that falls the same whether you're worth $12 billion or 12 cents. I stood at the window of a penthouse I had purchased but never actually lived in, and I want you to sit with that distinction for a moment, because it matters more than anything else I'm going to say today. A penthouse I had purchased but never actually lived in. There's a difference. I'm sure you know that difference. I'm sure you felt it in some room of your own life, some relationship, some version of yourself you wore every day that fit perfectly from the outside and suffocated you from the inside. I stood there, coffee going cold in my hand, city below me moving, millions of people already sprinting towards something they hadn't examined yet. And I felt it, that thing, that hollow, echoing, frightening nothing that lives just beneath the noise of a life built entirely outward. I had everything. I wanted to be precise about that because I'm not performing humility and I'm not asking for your sympathy. I genuinely had everything that the culture told me would constitute arrival. I had the kind of wealth that removes friction from daily life so completely that you forget friction ever existed. I had recognition, I had power, I had rooms full of people who wanted to be near me, and I use that word carefully, near me, not with me, who wanted proximity to what I represented. I had built something, several somethings, industries disrupted, problems solved at scale, the kind of legacy that earns speeches in magazine covers and retrospective documentaries before you're even dead. And I stood there at that window watching rain hit glass, and I felt absolutely, completely, terrifyingly empty. Wait, before you scroll, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is the part where a rich man complains about being rich, where success tells you success isn't enough and you roll your eyes because you'd love to find out for yourself. I understand. I would have thought the same thing 7 years ago. But I need you to stay with me because what I'm about to tell you isn't a story about money. It's a story about what you build when you're running from something. It's a story about the kind of man I became when I stopped being a person and started being a performance. And I genuinely suspect that some version of this story is your story too. Maybe not the penthouse, maybe not the billions, but the performance, the running, the hollow feeling in a room full of people who are applauding the version of you that you secretly don't believe in. That part is universal, so stay. I was raised to produce. I don't say that with bitterness. My father was a man who expressed love through provision. If you had what you needed, you were loved. If you earned something, you were valued. If you achieved, you existed in a way that mattered. He didn't know another language. He'd never been taught one. And so I learned the only fluency available to me in that house: accomplish, perform, build, produce, achieve, repeat. And I was extraordinarily good at it. I was fluent. I was exceptional. I was, by every measurable external metric, succeeding. What I didn't understand, what I couldn't have understood at 22 or 30 or even 41, was that fluency in performance is not the same as fluency in living. That building things outside of yourself does not build anything inside of yourself. That you can stack achievement on top of achievement until you've constructed something that looks from every angle exactly like a life, and still be standing inside it feeling like a stranger in someone else's house. I thought achievement was the antidote to the fear. Here's what I learned. It was the fear wearing achievement's clothes. Tell me something. When was the last time someone asked how you were doing, really doing, not the polite version, not the transactional version, and you told them the truth? When was the last time you sat in a room with someone who knew you and didn't perform for them? When was the last time you stopped optimizing your day and just existed in it without tracking the output, without justifying the time, without calculating what you had produced? I'm not asking rhetorically. I'm asking because I went 37 years without doing any of those things, and I thought I was thriving. I thought the absence of vulnerability was strength. I thought the inability to ask for help was independence. I thought keeping people slightly at arm's length, giving them the best and most impressive version of me, was generosity. I built walls and called them character. I built distance and called it discipline. I built an empire and called it a life. The company I was proudest of, I won't name it, this isn't about the company, was valued at something extraordinary. 9 years of work, 1,000 decisions made in the absence of sleep, teams I'd assembled from the most brilliant minds I could find, problems solved that everyone else had declared unsolvable. And the week we hit the milestone I had been chasing for half a decade, the number that was supposed to mean we made it, I went back to that penthouse, poured a glass of something expensive I'd been saving for exactly this occasion, and sat in the silence, and waited for the feeling I'd been promised, the feeling of arrival, the feeling that the machine of ambition inside my chest would finally mercifully power down and let me breathe, the feeling that I had earned the right to just be, not be productive, not be impressive, not be useful, just be a human being who was allowed to take up space without justifying it. I waited for an hour. It didn't come. What came instead was a text from my assistant about the next quarter's projections. And I answered it, because that's what I knew how to do. That's the only thing I knew how to do, and that That moment of answering the text in the dark with a full glass of something expensive and a hollow chest on the greatest night of my professional life, that is the moment I should have understood that something was catastrophically wrong with the foundation, but I didn't. Not yet. I thought I just needed to build more. Look at me for a second. I need you to understand what I mean by foundation, because this is the word everything else rests on. A foundation is not what you're building, it's what you're building from. And for most of my adult life, I was building from a wound, from a child's unresolved equation that went worth equals output. That said, if you stop producing, you stop mattering. That said, the only safe thing to be is useful, impressive, or necessary, because anything softer than that is dangerous. Anything more vulnerable than that is ammunition. Anything more honest than that might cost you the one thing you cannot afford to lose. What was the thing I couldn't afford to lose? Approval. Say it plainly. There it is. Underneath the empire, underneath the industry disruptions, underneath the net worth and the interviews and the reputation. A boy who was taught that love was conditional on performance and who spent 30 plus years building things to prove he was worth the unconditional version. And here's the cruelest irony of that equation. The more you build to earn unconditional love, the more impossible unconditional love becomes to receive. Because you never know whether they love you or the thing you built. You never know whether they'd stay if the building collapsed. And so you keep building, not because you want more, but because stopping feels like finding out the answer to a question you're terrified to ask. I was terrified. I just had the most expensive fear response in the history of Silicon Valley. I met her in a city that wasn't trying to impress anyone. I want to be careful here because she is a private person and this isn't about her in the way you might expect. This isn't a love story, or rather, it's a love story about something much larger than romance. It's a story about what happens when someone refuses to be impressed by your armor. When someone looks at you, not at what you've built, not at what you represent, not at the narrative that precedes you, but at you, the actual unperforming, imperfect, slightly lost in translation human underneath all of it, and doesn't look away. I was there for work. I am always there for work. I've always been somewhere for work. That is, I now understand the tell. When every trip is for work, when every relationship is managed around the schedule, when every conversation has a slight efficiency to it because time is your most guarded resource, you are not living. You are executing. You are running a very sophisticated biological machine called a body through a series of tasks and calling the output a life. She was at a dinner hosted by someone I barely knew. I was performing. I am extraordinarily good at performing. I can hold a room. I can make people feel seen in the aggregate. Smart with the smart ones, funny with the ones who want funny, visionary with the ones who came for vision. I read what people want and I give it to them. It feels like connection. It functions like connection. It is, I have come to understand, the opposite of connection. She watched me do it for about 40 minutes. And then she said very quietly, not unkindly, not performing insight herself, just stating a fact in the same tone you'd comment on the weather. She said, "You don't actually enjoy any of this, do you?" I should have deflected. I had 100 ways to deflect. I'd been practicing for decades. A self-deprecating joke, a reframe, a pivot toward the professional, the abstract, the philosophical. I had an entire arsenal of brilliant, charming, emotionally unavailable responses ready to deploy. Instead, I heard myself say, "No, just that, one syllable." The most honest thing I had said in a social context in longer than I could remember. And she nodded, like she'd known. And she didn't make it a moment. She didn't reward me for the vulnerability like it was a trick well executed. She didn't lean in with hungry compassion, making my pain about her empathy. She just nodded and said, "The food here is actually very good. You should try the thing on your left," and moved on. And I stood there with that single syllable still vibrating in my chest, feeling something I cannot fully name. A kind of clean, startling feeling, like a window opened in a room that hadn't had fresh air in years. I tried the thing on my left. It was extraordinary. Don't deny it. You have been in conversations where you said fine when you meant I am falling apart at the exact velocity of someone who looks like they have it together. You have been asked how things are going and delivered a summary of your external metrics when your internal experience was something no metric would survive. You have performed okayness in rooms full of people performing okayness, everyone silently waiting for someone to go first, no one going first, everyone going home to their separate, isolated, perfectly managed loneliness. I did this for almost 4 decades. I was masterful at it. I had optimized it. My performance of being fine was so complete, so polished, so convincingly inhabited that I had convinced myself. I didn't know I was performing anymore. I thought this is just who I am. Composed, focused, undisturbed. I thought the absence of emotional turbulence was maturity. I thought not needing people was freedom. It was a cage I'd built around myself and handed out the blueprints for, so that everyone in my life would know where the walls were and not try to come through them. We met 4 more times over the next 2 months, always in that city, which I was visiting more frequently than the work actually required, and was telling myself the work required it. She didn't ask me about my companies. She didn't ask me about my net worth or my vision or my legacy or what I was building next. She asked me things like, what did you want to be when you were 9? And when did you last do something with no purpose at all? And once, sitting in a cafe with rain on the window, always with the rain, always the same indifferent gray rain, she asked, who do you talk to about the hard things? And I said, because I was being honest now, because that first syllable had cracked something open that wouldn't close again, I don't have hard things. And she looked at me, really looked at me, not at the mask, at me, past the composure and the precision and the quiet authority that I wore like a suit, at the actual me, the one who had been waiting behind all of it for decades, slightly terrified, slightly exhausted, profoundly lonely in the specific way that only very successful people understand, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who need something from you, who want something from you, who are shaped in their behavior toward you by what you represent, and not one of them knowing what you feel like on a Wednesday morning when the anxiety is quiet and the achievement feels meaningless and you cannot remember the last time you wanted something that didn't arrive already pre-justified by a business case. She looked at me and said, I think you have so many hard things that you built an entire industry to avoid having to feel them. I built a company that processes data faster than any human mind. I thought if I could solve for inefficiency at scale, I would feel efficient, purposeful, complete. I built a system that allows people to move resources across borders instantaneously. I thought if I could remove barriers for others, I would feel less barricaded inside myself. I built a technology that was supposed to change the way humans relate to each other. I thought if I could redesign connection for millions of people, I would feel connected. I built and built and built and built. And here's what I learned. You cannot build your way to wholeness. You cannot optimize your way to presence. You cannot engineer a feeling that requires you to stop engineering long enough to simply feel it. The inner life is not a product problem. The heart is not a scaling challenge. The things that matter most about being alive, being known, being held, being trusted, being present are not problems to be solved. They are practices to be chosen every day, imperfectly, repeatedly, without a dashboard measuring your progress. I didn't know how to choose something I couldn't measure. I was going to have to learn. The decision to leave wasn't dramatic. I want to be honest about that because the narrative of transformation is usually sold as a single thunderclap moment. The diagnosis, the accident, the apocalyptic conversation in the rain. And there are thunderclap moments, I won't pretend there aren't. But the actual transformation happened in increments so small that for months I wasn't sure anything was changing. It happened in the moments between moments. In the 15-second pause before answering a message, asking myself, why am I answering this right now? What am I avoiding? In the morning, I woke up early and instead of immediately reaching for the phone to ingest the world's news and my company's metrics, I sat at the edge of the bed in the dark and just breathed for 7 minutes. 7 minutes. It sounds like nothing. It was, for me, at that point in my life, a revolution. She didn't tell me to do any of this. I want to be clear about that. She wasn't a therapist, and she wasn't a coach, and she wasn't the woman who saved a broken man, because that is a fantasy that does a disservice to both people in it. She was a person who was fully present in her own life, who had already done the work, not perfectly, not completely, not without cost, but who had looked at her own fear and called it by its name, who had learned to be in a room without performing, who knew the difference between being productive and being alive, and proximity to that, proximity to someone who is genuinely inhabiting their life, does something to you. It reveals, by contrast, how much of your life is performance, how much of your daily experience is managed rather than felt, how much energy goes into maintenance of an image rather than depth of an existence. It was confronting. It was the most important confrontation of my life. Here's what I learned about fear. Fear does not announce itself as fear. That's the trick of it. Fear is extraordinarily sophisticated. It comes dressed as ambition, as standards, as discipline, as vision. It comes as the voice that says more, faster, better again. It comes as the inability to rest without guilt, as the compulsion to fill silence with productivity, as the suspicion that if you stop moving, something will catch up with you. And you're right, by the way, something will catch up with you. But what you've been calling danger is actually just your own depth, your own hunger for something real, your own self, waiting patiently behind the noise of a life spent outrunning it. I had been outrunning myself for 37 years. I was tired, not the tired that sleep fixes, the tired that lives in the bones, the tired that is actually grief, grief for all the moments you were present for in body and absent for in soul, grief for the connections you held at a managed distance, grief for the version of yourself that learned very early that being soft was being vulnerable and being vulnerable was being weak and being weak meant losing something you couldn't afford to lose. I grieved. That was new. I had never allowed myself to grieve before. I had processed, analyzed, reframed, and moved forward. I had done everything with loss except actually feel it. And grief, it turns out, is not a problem you can outthink. It is a country you have to walk through. There are no shortcuts. There is no optimization. There is only the walking, one step, one day, one honest conversation, one morning at the edge of the bed in the dark with your phone face down and your chest cracked open, and the absolute terrifying grace of not running away from yourself. Look at me for a second. This is the part I need you to hear most carefully. Not because it's the most dramatic part, it isn't, but because it's the part that is most likely to determine whether you spend the next decade of your life building another floor on an empire that still has no foundation, or whether you do the thing that is smaller and slower and harder and worth everything. The bricks. I thought transformation was about demolishing what I'd built, about walking away from it all, making the grand gesture, the noble sacrifice. I thought it was about choosing between achievement and presence, between ambition and connection, between the empire and the life. And there is a version of that choice, yes. There are things I let go of, companies I stepped back from, roles I relinquished, meetings I stopped attending, deals I stopped pursuing, rooms I stopped trying to own. But the deeper work wasn't subtraction. It was foundation repair. It was going down into the basement of myself that I had never visited and looking at what I'd built on and understanding that the crack running through everything wasn't a failure of strategy or execution. It was that I had built on the wrong thing. I had built on approval, on the conditional love equation from that childhood house, on the belief that if I stopped being impressive, I would stop being loved, on the fear that if someone truly knew me, not the achievements, not the capability, not the vision, but the uncertainty and the grief and the wanting and the loneliness and the exhaustion, they would leave. She didn't leave. That was the data point that broke the equation. She knew. She knew more about what was actually happening inside me than any person I had ever allowed close, because she was the first person I had allowed to actually be close, not managed, not impressed, not strategically positioned, but actually there, in the real room of me, with the lights on. And she stayed. Not because I was impressive, not because I was useful, not because of what I'd built, because she chose to, because she was a person of extraordinary character who was not afraid of depth, and I was finally, terrifyingly, showing her mine. I left in October. I want to be honest about what that means. It is not a metaphor, though it feels like one. I physically relocated. I chose a place that is slower and older and less interested in disruption, a place where the culture does not organize itself around productivity and optimization and net worth, where people sit with their food rather than eating over keyboards, where the morning has a sound that isn't traffic moving toward achievement, where you can have a conversation with someone who has known one place their whole life and feel in their rootedness the reflection of your own rootlessness. I brought very little with me. That was intentional. Not as an ascetic exercise. I'm not performing simplicity. I still have resources and I still use them. But because I understood, finally, that I had been using possessions as furniture for the performance. Each acquisition was a set piece in the story I was telling about who I was. And I didn't want to tell that story anymore. I wanted to find out what the story actually was when it wasn't being curated. The first 3 weeks were deeply uncomfortable. I'm saying that plainly because nobody tells you that part. The silence was uncomfortable. The slowness was uncomfortable. The absence of the machine, the constant humming, demanding machine of high-performance professional life, created a silence that I initially experienced as threat. My nervous system had been calibrated to urgency for so long that the absence of urgency registered as emergency. I woke up early, anxious, with nothing to optimize. I reached for the phone out of pure habit, found it across the room where I'd deliberately left it the night before, and had to sit with the physical sensation of not filling the moment with information. It was excruciating. It was necessary. It was, I understand now, the beginning of coming home, not to a place, but to myself, to the actual texture of my own mind unmediated by input, to the way I feel in the morning before the world's agenda colonizes my consciousness, to my own hunger, my own rhythm, my own pace, separate from the velocity of ambition. Here's what I learned about presence. Presence is not the absence of ambition. I want to be clear about that because the self-help industrial complex has done something strange and unhelpful to the concept of presence, made it synonymous with passivity, with resignation, with trading in your drive for a meditation cushion. That is not what I'm describing. I am still ambitious. I am still building. I still have a mind that runs at a pace that exhausts most people in the room, and I have mostly made peace with that. But there is a difference, a profound, life-altering difference between ambition that comes from fullness and ambition that comes from emptiness. Between building because you love what you're building and building because you're terrified of what you'll find if you stop. Between driving towards something and running from something. The destination might look the same from the outside. The internal experience is entirely different. When I build now, I build differently. I stop at the end of the day. Not because the work is done, the work is never done, but because I am a person and not a function, and the person requires tending. I eat meals that are not eaten over a screen. I have conversations that are not strategic. I sit in the evening with someone I love and we do not discuss outputs. We discuss the small things, the beautiful, inconsequential, irreplaceable small things of an actual shared life. A bird that landed on the railing, a sentence in a book that stopped her, the way the light changed at 4 p.m. I am learning, slowly, imperfectly, with regular backsliding, to find those things sufficient, to let the quiet be quiet, to let the day end without demanding that it justify itself. Don't deny it. There is a version of your life that you are optimizing toward that you have never actually examined. There is a number, a net worth, a title, a metric, a milestone that functions in your psyche as the threshold for arrival. When I get there, you say, when I achieve that, when I reach that point. And I am not telling you the goal is wrong. I am not telling you that ambition is the enemy, that success is hollow, that comfort is a trap. I am telling you that when I get there is the language of a man who has not yet understood that there does not exist. That the feeling of arrival is not a reward for sufficient achievement. It is a practice you choose now with what you have, imperfectly and repeatedly, or it is a feeling you never have. I have met people with nothing by external measures who were more there, more present, more alive, more genuinely inhabited in their existence than anyone I sat across from in a boardroom. Not because poverty is noble and success is corrupt, but because they hadn't accidentally mistaken the map for the territory. They hadn't confused the symbol of a life for the actual living of one. The map is not the territory. The achievement is not the feeling. The empire is not the home. She asked me once very early what I was most afraid of. I said failure. It was automatic, conditioned, the appropriate answer for a man of my profile. The answer that sounds like honest vulnerability without requiring actual exposure. She waited. What else, she said, and I sat with it. Sat with the discomfort of the real answer forming in the place where the performed answer usually goes. Sat with the feeling of it, the shape of it, the slightly shameful, intimate truth of it. Being known, I said finally, and found lacking. She nodded, slowly. You know what that is? She said. What? Everyone, she said. That's just everyone. I want to tell you about the altar, not in a spiritual sense, though if that language serves you, use it. But in the sense of, what do you sacrifice to? What receives the offering of your best hours, your deepest attention, your most alive and capable self? What do you bring your first energy to before the day has taken anything from you? For 37 years, my altar was the work. My first hours, my best thinking, my deepest reserves, all of it went to the machine first. The rest of life got what remained, which was usually very little and usually very tired. I reversed it. That sounds simple. It is not simple. It is a daily act of will against decades of conditioning. It means my first hour belongs to me, to the journal where I write with no audience, to the walk I take with no destination, to the coffee I drink in the garden while thinking about nothing in particular. It means she gets my present attention, not my managed attention. It means the people I love receive my actual self, not the professional grade performance version. It means the work, when I arrive at it, receives a man who has already been tended, not a hollow machine trying to fill itself by producing more. The work hasn't suffered. This is the thing that surprises people. They hear, I slowed down and reversed my priorities, and they assume the productivity collapsed. It didn't. Or rather, the metrics that matter didn't. What collapsed was the frantic, desperate, fear-driven velocity of a man running from himself. What emerged instead was something more sustainable, more creative, more genuinely innovative than anything I produced in the white-knuckle years of pure optimization. Because I was finally building from fullness. Because the foundation was real. Here's what I learned about love. Real love. Not the performed version, not the conditional transaction I learned in that childhood house, not the impression management and strategic intimacy that I mistook for connection for 4 decades. Real love requires you to be known, fully, including the parts you have carefully kept in the dark. Including the fear and the grief and the not knowing and the exhaustion, including the version of you at 2 a.m. when the composure has dissolved and you're just a person in the dark who wants to be held and doesn't know how to ask for it. You have to be known to be loved. I know that sounds obvious. It is obvious. It is also for certain kinds of people, high-achieving, self-sufficient, emotionally efficient, deeply private people who learned very early that need is dangerous and vulnerability is ammunition. It is the most terrifying and the most necessary truth there is. I was afraid of being known. I am still sometimes afraid of being known. The fear doesn't disappear. The conditioning doesn't evaporate because you've understood it. But I move through the fear now rather than building walls around it. I say the true thing more often than I used to. I ask for what I need. I tell the people I love what they mean to me, in plain language without burying it in gesture or provision or impressive action. I say, I need you today. I say, I am struggling with this. I say, I don't know. I say, I was wrong about that. I say, I'm scared. Every time I say those words, I expect the world to end. Every time the world does not end. Every time something small and real is built. The collapse was the mercy. I want you to hear that. The collapse, the standing at the window with cold coffee and a hollow chest on the greatest night of my professional life. That was the mercy, not the punishment. The collapse was the invitation. Emptiness is not the enemy of meaning. It is the condition for it. You cannot fill what is already full of noise. You cannot build something real on a foundation of fear. The falling apart was not the end of something worth keeping. It was the demolition of a structure that was never going to hold what actually needed to be held. The new thing had to be built differently, smaller in some ways, quieter, less impressive to people driving past at speed, less optimized for the admiration of people who will never live in it, but real, inhabitable, genuinely load-bearing, a home, not an empire. I'm not coming back, not because the place I left was wrong and the place I am is right. I'm not interested in that kind of geography. I'm not coming back because the man who lived there, who performed there, who built there, who optimized and achieved and ran there. That man is not who I am anymore. Or rather, I am still him. I contain him. I don't disown him. He built things I am proud of. He solved problems worth solving. He worked with a ferocity that I don't entirely regret. But he was incomplete. He was operating at extraordinary external capacity and almost zero internal depth. He was a function that had forgotten it was a person. I remember now. I remember every morning. On the good days, easily. On the hard days, with effort and intention. I remember in the walk without a destination. In the journal without an audience, in the conversation with someone I love that has no agenda and no output. I remember in the moment of stopping at the end of the day and choosing presence over production. I remember in the words I say now that I never said before, I need, I love, I'm scared, I was wrong, thank you, I'm here, tell me something, what are you building? Not the professional answer, the real one. What are you actually building with the hours and the attention and the care and the energy that constitute your one and only life? Is it something you chose, having examined it? Or is it something you inherited from a wound that was given a business plan? Is it pointed towards something you actually want or away from something you're afraid to feel? Does it have a foundation of real things? Presence, honesty, love, depth? Or is it floating above the groundwater of unexamined fear, impressive from above and empty at its core? I'm not asking to indict you. I'm asking because I spent most of my life not asking, look at me for a second. You don't have to burn it all down. You don't have to make the grand gesture. You don't have to move countries or leave industries or make the dramatic sacrifice that makes a good story but isn't actually what's required. You just have to start where the fear is, today. Not when the project is finished, not when the revenue hits the number, not when the children are older or the mortgage is paid or the circumstance is finally right. The circumstance is never going to be finally right. The circumstance is just the current chapter in the story of a life, and the story changes not when the circumstances cooperate, but when you decide to change the story you're telling. Put the phone down, not forever. For 7 minutes, tell someone the true thing, sit at the edge of the bed in the dark, and breathe and feel what you actually feel, underneath the performance, underneath the metrics, underneath the extremely convincing story of a person who has it together. Lay one brick that isn't for the empire, lay one brick for the home. She said something to me recently. We were sitting in the garden, the light doing that late afternoon thing I've learned to love, and she wasn't looking at me, she was looking at the garden, and she said in the tone of someone thinking aloud, I think you're actually here now. I asked what she meant. I mean, you're not somewhere else, she said. You're here, in this garden, in this light. You're not running a calculation. You're not managing the next thing. You're just here. I thought about it. How long did it take? I asked. She smiled, still looking at the garden. About 3 years of Tuesdays, she said. 3 years of Tuesdays, not the thunderclap, not the single turning point, not the moment where the man decided to be different and immediately was. 3 years of ordinary days, in each of which a choice was made, imperfectly, sometimes poorly, sometimes with full backslide into the old pattern, to show up for the life rather than executing the performance of one. This is the work. This is the unsexy, undramatic, uncinematic truth of change. Not the crash, not the catharsis. The Tuesday, the Wednesday, the ordinary morning where you put the phone down and walk into the garden and notice the light. The conversation where you say the true thing, the moment of asking for help from someone you love, feeling the floor stay solid beneath you, updating the equation that said need was dangerous. The bricks, one at a time, the foundation. Built for real this time. I left, and in the leaving, I found what I'd been building toward the entire time without knowing it. Not a destination, not an achievement, not a milestone that finally delivered the feeling I'd been promised, a life. An actual, inhabited, imperfect, present, terrifyingly real, and remarkably sufficient life. I left the performance. I came home to myself. Don't deny it. You know what I'm talking about. You've felt it. In the quiet between things, in the moment before the phone fills the space, in the flash of longing for something that no achievement has yet delivered. You know. Some part of you has always known that the running is running, that the building without foundation will eventually require the collapse, that the version of yourself underneath all the performance and the optimization and the carefully managed impression is not weaker than the one the world sees. It is more capable of love, more capable of presence, more capable of building something that will actually hold. It is more you. Here's what I learned. The fear of being known is smaller than the cost of being invisible. The vulnerability of asking is smaller than the grief of never receiving. The discomfort of presence is smaller than the emptiness of performance. The slowness of building real things is smaller than the loneliness of living in a structure that looks like a life but isn't one. The collapse was the mercy. The emptiness was the invitation. And you, sitting there watching this, some part of you leaning forward because you recognize something in these words that lives in the part of you that hasn't been performing. You are not too late. You are not too built. You are not too high up in the structure to climb down and look at what it's standing on. You are exactly where the invitation lives. Put something down tonight that you've been carrying that wasn't yours to carry. Say one true thing to one person who deserves to know it. Sit in a room without optimizing it. Let one Tuesday be the Tuesday. Not because it fixes everything, not because transformation is immediate or the fear disappears or the wounds close overnight, but because one brick on a real foundation is worth more than 1,000 floors of something that was never going to hold. And because the home, the actual, unglamorous, profoundly sufficient home of an examined, present, genuinely inhabited life is the only thing, I promise you, the only thing worth building toward. I know because I spent 40 years building everything else, and only one thing ever made me feel like I was finally, actually, completely here.